revile it says the gods or the mighty ones. It says, nor curse the rulers of your people. Do you see this? So they were to be under authority. They were not to curse or speak evil regarding their leaders. You understand? And those of you who are in the body of the Messiah, who, whether it be on your jobs, whether it be in the instruction of those that our Heavenly Father has put over you, do you see this? You are not to be rebellious against them. You understand? If there's an issue doctrinal wise, there's a certain way that you deal with them. And our King already laid that down. You see this? Even in the law, it speaks about how when you're not supposed to suffer or allow those who are individuals or your brothers, you are not to allow them to remain in sin. Do you see this? There's a certain structure when certain things or things that are contentious. Do you understand? Things that can cause strife. There's certain rules and manners of dealing with one another. The body of the Messiah. Do you understand? Let's go to Deuteronomy, the 15th chapter, please. Still in the law, or what is known as the Torah. Deuteronomy, 15th chapter. And let's start at, and this is regarding the manner of release. Let's listen here. Start at verse 12. It says here, listen. And this is regarding servitude again. Listen carefully. It says, and if your brother in Hebrew man or in Hebrew woman be sold unto you and serve you 6 years, then in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. Do you see this? We're going back. We're just looking at reflections of our ancestors in the past. What happened when people served one another? Do you understand? They received their wages. You understand? And at a certain time, they were to go free. Listen carefully. Verse 13. And when you send him out free from you, you shall not let him go away empty. Do you see this? And you have some people who are racists, and what they do, they're bigots. They'll try to use the scriptures, misrepresenting them. And they'll try to basically say that, you see, God, according to their understanding, they'll say God, he condoned slavery. And many have tried to use in ancient times, you had people who were basically colonizers, and what they would try to do is use the scriptures to justify themselves, having people underneath them and mistreating them. And they would run to the scriptures and use the scriptures improperly to justify what they were doing. But what we see here is that was not the case, was it, my family? When you had a person who served you, when they left, you weren't to let them go empty-handed. They would have received wages. Do you understand? Thank you, my Father, my King. Look at verse 14. He says, you shall furnish him liberally out of your flock and out of your floor and out of your winepress. Of that wherewith the Master Yahweh, your Almighty, have blessed you, you shall give unto him. You see, when our Heavenly Father blesses those of you who are in authority, he blesses you not so you can live good, you and your house. And that's it. When our Heavenly Father raises you up or elevates you to a higher position, it's for you to benefit, yes, but it's for those who are under you to benefit as well. You understand, my family? See, some of you who are believers in the Messiah, many of you, our Father King has revealed to me, many of you who have your jobs now, you're in comfort. And many of you have forgotten these certain principles. And this is why we're going to the scriptures to reflect on our ancestors. Don't get comfortable or lax to the point where you think that everything's all right. Because our Heavenly Father can bring that floor right underneath you and humble you real quick. He's blessed you so you can be a blessing to others. Do you understand, my brothers and sisters, who it applies to? Notice how he's telling them that you will give them things from your stuff. Look at verse 14 again. He says, you shall furnish him liberally out of your flock and out of your floor and out of your winepress of that wherewith the Master Yahweh your Almighty hath blessed you, you shall give unto him. See, our Heavenly Father cares about the poor. Do you understand? Listen, he says, and you shall remember that you was a bondman in the land of Egypt, and the Master Yahweh your Almighty redeemed you. Therefore I command you this thing today. You understand? Notice how he was getting their minds to remember when they were slaves and how they were mistreated. He always put that in their memory. Thank you, Abba, for the correction. He put that in their memory to remember. So that way they wouldn't become tyrants. Do you see this? As their former taskmasters. As their former tyrants. Do you understand, my brothers and sisters? Listen. Verse 16. He says, and it shall be, if he shall say unto you, I will not go away from you, because he loved you, and your house, because he is well with you, then you shall take an oil and thrust it through his ear unto the door, and he shall be your servant forever. And also unto your maidservant you shall do likewise. It shall not seem hard unto you when you send him away free from you, for he hath been worth a double hired servant to you, and serving you 6 years. And the Master Yahweh your Almighty shall bless you in all that you do. See, these was conditional instances. If the servant loved his master, then notice how there were rules and regulations, there was commandments, and how to deal with that individual. And if they, just served and wanted to go, they were to go, but you want to let them go empty-handed. It was for the benefit of the one who was put in authority and the one who was put under him. Do you see this? Certain similarities we have today when you have someone who may have been unemployed. They went through hard times. And what do? They go to look for a job. They fill out what we know today in modern day times as an application. They might have a resume if they have that resource. Some may not. But nonetheless, they fill out a contract. Do you understand? With the employer. And there's certain benefits that's going to benefit both parties. Do you see this? And what they're doing is they're basically not being a slave with a whip across their back. But what they're doing is they're basically being in covenant or contracted with the employer to provide servitude. And it's amazing today how people, those in the body of Messiah, and even those who are not, who they complain on their job. Not realizing that when they signed the contract, there's certain obligations that you are to fulfill under that specific contract. Do you see this, my brothers and sisters? And many of you in the body of Messiah are becoming ungrateful as well. Be thankful that our Heavenly Father has supplied your needs. You're on these jobs for reasons. Do you understand? Specific reasons. To be a light to those who are in darkness. Do you understand? And those of you who are members in the body of the Messiah who are on your jobs, who have been elevated to managers and supervisors and things of that nature, you are not to forget where you come from. There's a reason why you're there as well. Do you understand? For those who are under you to benefit and to be treated with respect and honor and dignity. Believe this here. If more companies were to apply righteousness, do you realize that their company would be blessed? Our Heavenly Father would bless the work of their hands. Companies that are doing things the right way, not companies that are doing things illegally, but companies who are operating under the rules and regulations of equality and dignity. Do you see this? Our Heavenly Father will bless, do you understand, those businesses because they are conducting themselves in a righteous manner. But for those who are treating the people wrongly, woe be unto you. Thank you, my Father, my King. Don't think that even on your job, the gospel message is still to be conveyed. The light of our Messiah is still to shine. Do you understand? Thank you, my Father, my King, for your wisdom. Let's go to Deuteronomy, the 17th chapter, please. And this is dealing with certain injunctions and certain commandments. Listen, regarding how we should treat people. Deuteronomy 17th chapter, starting at verse 14. And this is pertaining to a king. We're all reflecting here because we want to look at how our Heavenly Father, we're getting a balanced message, how he dealt with those who were servants, rulers. You understand? Now, let's look at how a king was to conduct himself during a nation. Listen carefully, verse 14. And it reads, when you are come into the land, which the Master Yahuwah, your Almighty, give you. Thank you, my Father, my King. Did you all catch that? See, there were certain injunctions, how they were to conduct themselves when their feet touched that land of promise. Listen, when you are come into the land, which the Master Yahuwah, your Almighty, give you, and shall possess it, and shall dwell there, and shall say, I will set a king over me, like as all the nations that are about me. You shall in any wise set him a king. Listen carefully. He says, you shall in any wise set him king over you, whom the Master Yahuwah, your Almighty, shall choose. One from among your brothers shall you set king over you. You may not set a stranger over you, which is not your brother. See, our ancestors during that time, they weren't going to live any kind of way. They were not going to just choose who they want in there. That throne represents our Heavenly Father. And he was going to choose who should sit there to represent him the right way. Not anybody from a foreign nation. In this context, they had to have been a Hebrew. Continue verse 16. Regarding his duties. Listen. It says, but he shall not multiply horses to himself, nor cause the people to return to Egypt, to the end that he should multiply horses. For as much as the Master Yahuwah hath said unto you, you shall henceforth return no more that way. Neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away. Neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold. And it shall be when he sitteth upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests and the Levites. You see this? Let's stop for a moment. Thank you, my Father, my King, for your mission. Notice how the king, our Heavenly Father, was going to choose this specific king. And notice how the king was not to be haughty or multiply horses or wives to himself, so his heart wouldn't turn away and be lifted up. And notice how the king was to keep a copy of the scriptures of the law. See, he wasn't just going to sit in that throne, the throne of our Heavenly Father, and occupy that throne and just rule it as a tyrant or do what he so pleased. Many of our ancestors, at times, they misrepresented our Heavenly Father. We know the history. Those of you who are Bible students, you know the history, or if you don't, search the history of how many of our ancestors made mistakes and bad choices with the throne of our Heavenly Father. Many corrupted the priesthood. You go into the Hasmonean dynasty and you can see that. How people begin to put in authority whoever they wanted to in the priesthood and on the throne. You understand, my brothers and sisters? Could you all imagine if you had these rulers here today in these modern day times in their different countries, and they each had a copy of the scriptures? They'll be held to a lot of higher standards, wouldn't they? But of course, we know that many of them, not all of them, but we know many of them, it doesn't apply to them. Because if it did apply, we'll see a better world, wouldn't we? We'll see a place of fair and equity. Go back to verse 18 again, as my Father, my King, allow me to continue. It says, and it shall be when he sit upon the throne of his kingdom, that he shall write him a copy of this law in a book out of that which is before the priests, the Levites. And it shall be with him, and he shall read therein all the days of his life. that he may learn to fear the Master Yahuwah his Almighty, to keep all the words of this law and these statutes, to do them, that his heart be not lifted up above his brothers, and that he turn not aside from the commandment to the right hand or to the left, to the end that he may prolong his days in his kingdom, he and his children, in the midst or the middle of Yasrael. So a ruler was to have the scriptures as his guide. Do you see this, my brothers and sisters? And he was to read it and to learn to fear our Heavenly Father. You see this, my brothers and sisters? Those of you who are leaders out there, there's a certain way you carry yourself. Not better than those are your brothers or your sisters. There's a certain way that you represent our Father and our King. You see this, my brothers and sisters? Thank you, my Father, my King. Let's go into, so we've learned so far in the Didache, we've learned how those who were in certain positions of authority were to conduct themselves, and how those who were under them were to conduct themselves, because they basically, our Heavenly Father, do you see this, rules over the both of them, and they were to treat one another the right way. You understand, my family? And we see that in the law so far. We see how that backs up and it matches. Do you understand? We can see how our ancestors reflected and saw these beautiful truths. Now let's go to the New Testament. Let's go to, for those of you who believe in it, let's go to 1 Timothy. Let's go to one of our ancestors. 1 Timothy. You see, Shaul passed down knowledge to Timothy. You see this, my brothers and sisters? And Timothy passed it down to others, to faithful men, as he was instructed to do so. 1 Timothy. See, a lot of you forget about Timothy. Don't make the mistake of doing that. 1 Timothy. Let's go to the 6th chapter. 1 Timothy. Chapter 6. And let's start at verse 1. And this is pertaining to servants. See, remember our ancestors, they were thank you, Father, my King. They were also, during that time when the gospel was preached, they were still under governments, weren't they? It was a certain way they were to conduct themselves, wasn't it? 1 Timothy chapter 6, start at verse 1. It reads, "Let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of the Almighty and his teaching," it says his doctrine, meaning teaching, "be not blasphemed." See, this is a high calling. See, a lot of people, especially in the body of Messiah, many of us, we struggle, don't we? We think just because we receive the gospel or the good news, the Bashura, many of us think that now, we have a certain sneer. And there's a certain way that we can pump our chest out and we can think that we're all that and then some. But that's not the case. If you say you follow the apostles' doctrine, there's a certain way as a believer that our King taught the apostles how to conduct themselves. And the apostles passed it down to the assembly. The called out ones, correct? Again, let as many servants as are under the yoke count their own masters worthy of all honor, that the name of the Almighty and his doctrine or his teaching be not blasphemed. And they that have believing masters, listen carefully, and they that have believing masters, let them not despise them, because they are brothers, but rather do them service, because they are faithful and beloved, partakers of the benefit these things teach and exalt. This is what Shaul was telling Timothy to do. You see, you had believers who also had people who were over them, masters, or as we say today, supervisors or bosses, as far as the jargon that we use today, terminology and things of that nature. So when you have a believing master, you're not to despise them. So we can see in ancient times, you had believers in the Messiah who had different social statuses. Do you see this? But regardless of their social statuses, they were not to abuse one another. But they were to give all honor and treat each other the right way. Look at verse 3, please. It says, if any man teach otherwise and consent not to wholesome words, even the words of our master Yahushua the Messiah, listen, and to the doctrine which is accordingly to godliness or righteousness, he is proud, knowing nothing, but doting about questions and strifes of words, wherefore comes envy, strife, railings, evil surmisings, perverse disputings of men of corrupt minds, and destitute of the truth, supposing that gain is godliness. From such withdraw yourself. You see, you had the arrogant even in those days who hated authority, even on a natural sense. And Shaul is telling Timothy, withdraw yourself from such. You have certain believers who's following the Messiah, and even on their jobs, they feel too proud to even take correction or even take instruction from a supervisor or a manager. Yes, you're a child of the king, but there's a certain way you would conduct yourself. Some of you say, oh, but what if my supervisor is a devil? Or what if he's an unbeliever? Well, hold on. There's certain ways that I find a king is going to command us what to do regarding that. But notice how you had people who didn't want to hear that. And Shaul is telling Timothy, withdraw yourself. Do you see this? Thank you, my Father, my King. Let's listen. Verse 6, let's continue. He says, but godliness with contentment is great gain. See, a lot of us have to learn how to be content. There's many people in the body of the Messiah they're too ambitious. But you have to learn to be content. Listen, verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. Now, if you have an atheist who reads this, even they will have to concur. They will have to agree. No matter how rich a person may become in his life, when your time comes for you to take your last breath, you can't take none of that stuff with you. You look at all the celebrities who are receiving fame and fortune. Are they taking that fame and fortune with them? They're going right in that ground with nothing. Do you see this, my family? And if they do have something, that their spirit can't take it with them. It's going to rot right in that grave. Thank you, my Father, my King. Listen. Again, verse 7. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment or clothing, let us be therewith content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is the root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. That's powerful. And people are like that today, unfortunately. They love money. Money's not evil, but the love of it has driven them to madness and corruption. And they don't even realize that they pierced themselves with many sorrows. All that time wasted when they could have applied that to loving their neighbor as themselves. Loving our Heavenly Father with all their heart, mind, soul, and strength. Loving our King above all. Loving their neighbors as themselves. Do you see this? Treating each other like they would want to be treated. Thank you, my Father, my King. Let's go to 2 Peter. Let's go to Kafra. You know, many of you say you follow the apostles' doctrine. Well, let's see. Let's examine ourselves and see. Let's go to 1 Peter chapter 2. Thank you, my Father, my King, for your wisdom and your teaching. And let's start at verse 1 Peter chapter 2, starting at verse 13. Listen, my brothers and sisters. It says, submit yourselves to every ordinance of men for the master's sake, whether it be to the king as supreme, or unto governors as unto them that are sent by him, for the punishment of evildoers, and for the praise of them that do well. You see, a lot of you don't like that. Why I gotta be submissive? There's a reason. If you have someone who is corrupt and they have those positions, in due time, our Heavenly Father is going to strip them of that. Do you see this? But we are to be under the structure of authority. Listen, verse 15. For so is the will of the Almighty, that with well-doing you may put to silence the ignorance of foolish men, as free and not using your liberty for a cloak of maliciousness, but as the servants of the Almighty. Honor all men. Love the brotherhood. Fear the Almighty. Honor the king. Servants, be subject to your masters with all fear, not only to the good, listen, not only to the good and gentle, but also to the forward. For this is thankworthy if a man, for conscience towards the Almighty, endure grief, suffering wrongfully. For what glory is it if when you be buffeted for your faults, you shall take it patiently? Listen, but if when you do well and suffer for it, you shall take it patiently. This is acceptable. This is acceptable with the Almighty. You see this? Some people say, oh, well, they got my boss have an attitude. They're evil. Why? Because our Heavenly Father to suffer those things. Do you see this? The gospel can be preached. The light of our master can be given. Do you understand, my brothers and sisters? Meditate on these things. Continue in the way of life. Learn to grow. I love all of you, my brothers and sisters, and continue. Do you understand? Continue to stay strong and stay in the faith. In the name of our Father and our King, Maranatha. Amen.